Hey guys, tonight we venture into one of the most chilling mysteries hidden within the Star Wars galaxy. The terrifying truth about what the Death Star was truly designed to accomplish. Not just the destruction of worlds, but something far more sinister that would have fundamentally changed the nature of the Force itself across the entire galaxy. Galen Erso, the brilliant scientist, hunched over his quantum calculations in the dead of night, his hands trembling as he discovers that his clean energy research has become something unspeakably dark. The numbers don't lie. The Kyber crystal array isn't just focusing destructive power, it's doing something else entirely, something that makes planetary annihilation look like a mere side effect. Director Krennic stands in the shadows of the Death Star's core chamber, staring up at the massive Kyber crystal housing. His voice echoes in the vast mechanical cathedral as he whispers to his aide about the weapon's true potential. Not the ability to destroy planets, but to harness something the Emperor calls the living force itself. The aide asks what that means, and Krennic's response chills the air around them. He speaks of energy that doesn't dissipate after destruction, but instead flows somewhere else entirely. Grand Moff Tarkin, alone in his private quarters aboard the Death Star, reviews classified Imperial documents that few have ever seen. His usually composed demeanor cracks as he reads about the weapon's secondary function. The reports speak of Force energy readings that spike dramatically during planetary destruction, energy that doesn't match any known physics, energy that seems to be channeled somewhere within the station itself. Tarkin closes the files and stares out at the stars, wondering if they've built something that even the Empire cannot control. But here's where the mystery deepens. In the moments before Alderaan's destruction, Imperial sensors detect something extraordinary. The planet isn't just rich in resources or strategically important. Hidden archives reveal that Alderaan was chosen for a very specific reason, connected to its ancient history with the Jedi, and something the Emperor needed from its Force-sensitive population. The destruction of Alderaan wasn't political demonstration, it was harvesting. Now I know that 79% of you watching this incredible journey with me haven't hit that subscribe button yet, and I completely understand. But if tonight's story captivates you, if you find yourself drawn into these hidden depths of galactic history, I'd be deeply grateful if you'd consider subscribing to help this channel grow. Your support allows me to dive deeper into these forgotten chronicles and bring you the mysteries that the galaxy tried to bury. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm genuinely excited to hear from you in the comments about where you're listening from around the world and what time of night or day you've chosen to embark on this journey with me. There's something magical about knowing we're all connected across different time zones, exploring these galactic mysteries together. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, get into your blanket, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Because what I'm about to reveal will fundamentally change how you understand the Death Star, the Empire, and the true scope of Emperor Palpatine's ambitions. We're not just talking about a weapon of mass destruction. We're talking about a device designed to commit genocide against the Force itself, to drain the spiritual essence from entire worlds and channel that energy toward a purpose so dark that even hardened Imperial officers questioned their loyalty when they learned the truth. The Emperor didn't spend 20 years and unlimited resources building the Death Star just to intimidate rebellious systems. He built it to feed on them, to consume not just their bodies and their worlds, but something far more precious, something that connects every living being to the cosmic energy that binds the galaxy together. And tonight, through classified Imperial records, forgotten technical specifications, and the testimonies of those brave enough to speak truth about what they witnessed, we'll uncover exactly what the Death Star's core was truly designed to accomplish, how it worked, why certain worlds were chosen as targets, and how close the galaxy came to losing something that could never be replaced. The story begins not with the Death Star's construction, but decades earlier, in the underground caverns of Geonosis, where Poggle the Lesser discovered something in his planet's geological surveys that would change the course of galactic history, something that caught the attention of Count Dooku, and later, the Emperor himself. By the time we reach the end of tonight's journey, you'll understand why Luke Skywalker's victory at the Battle of Endor saved more than the rebellion. He saved the very soul of the galaxy itself. So settle in, because we're about to explore the darkest secret ever conceived within the Star Wars universe. The year is 5 AB, 1 year after the Battle of Endor has shattered the Empire and sent its remnants fleeing to the galaxy's outer rim. You are an investigative archivist working with the New Republic's Imperial Records Recovery Division, tasked with sifting through the massive troves of classified Imperial data recovered from Coruscant Core and dozens of other former Imperial strongholds. Your team operates from a converted Imperial Star Destroyer that now serves as a mobile research facility, drifting through space as you methodically catalog the Empire's darkest secrets. The irony isn't lost on you that you're using the Empire's own tools to uncover the truth they tried so desperately to hide. The corridors of your makeshift archive ship hum with the constant whisper of life support systems and data processors working around the clock. Banks of Imperial computers, their screens casting pale blue light across rooms filled with holographic projectors and document scanners, create an almost ethereal atmosphere as terabytes of information flow past like digital waterfalls. Your investigation team consists of 3 remarkable individuals, each bringing crucial expertise to this monumental task. There's Senior Technician Kira Thorne, a former Death Star maintenance engineer who managed to escape the first Death Star just weeks before the Battle of Yavin. Her technical knowledge of the station's inner workings proves invaluable, though she carries visible scars from her time aboard the massive weapon, both physical and psychological. Her voice carries a particular weight when she describes the strange energy readings she encountered in the station's deeper levels, readings that never matched any official Imperial specifications. Working alongside her is Commander Jax Meridian, a former Rebel intelligence operative whose specialty was intercepting and decoding Imperial communications during the war. His analytical mind excels at connecting seemingly unrelated pieces of information scattered across years of Imperial documentation. Meridian has an uncanny ability to spot patterns in the chaos of classified files, and his experience infiltrating Imperial facilities gives him insights into how the Empire structured its most sensitive projects. The third member of your core team is Dr. Elena Vasquez, a brilliant physicist who once worked for the Imperial Department of Military Research before defecting to the rebellion 2 years before Endor. Her background in energy systems and her intimate knowledge of Imperial research protocols make her essential for understanding the technical aspects of whatever you might uncover. Vasquez carries herself with the cautious demeanor of someone who has seen the Empire's scientific capabilities firsthand and knows how dangerous their innovations could be. Your personal motivation for this investigation runs deeper than professional duty. During the war, your home system of Chandrila experienced mysterious energy disruptions that Imperial forces claimed were caused by rebel sabotage, but the patterns never made sense, and now, with access to Imperial records, you suspect those disruptions might have been connected to something much larger and more sinister. The investigation began 3 months ago when Technician Thorne discovered discrepancies in the Death Star's technical specifications. According to official Imperial documentation, the station's superlaser required a specific amount of power and a particular Kyber crystal configuration. But Thorne's first-hand experience aboard the station told a different story. The actual power systems were far more complex, with energy conduits and storage systems that seemed designed for purposes beyond simple destructive output. This discovery led your team to begin cross-referencing Death Star technical data with other Imperial projects, looking for connections that might explain the discrepancies. What you found disturbed everyone involved. References to something called Project Celestial Power appeared in dozens of classified files, always in connection with Death Star development, but never with clear explanations of its actual purpose. The deeper you dug, the more questions arose. Why did the Death Star's core chamber occupy such a massive amount of space within the station? Why were certain Imperial scientists recruited specifically for their knowledge of exotic energy phenomena? And why did so many Death Star personnel report strange experiences while working in the station's deeper levels, experiences that were systematically classified and buried in Imperial psychological evaluation files? Your workspace aboard the archive ship reflects the scope of your investigation. Holographic displays show three-dimensional models of Death Star schematics rotating slowly in the air, their technical details highlighted in different colors to show power flow, structural components, and areas that remain mysterious even after months of analysis. Physical documents, printed on Imperial flimsiplast and marked with the highest security classifications, cover every available surface. The ship's main investigation chamber houses your most sensitive discoveries. Here, in a room sealed against electronic surveillance and protected by multiple layers of security, you store the evidence that has begun to paint a picture so disturbing that you sometimes question whether you should continue the investigation at all. Because what you're uncovering suggests that the Death Star, terrible as it was, represented only the visible portion of a much larger and more horrifying Imperial project. A project that would have fundamentally altered the nature of life itself throughout the galaxy. The evidence points towards something that goes beyond military strategy or political control. Something that suggests the Empire's ultimate goal wasn't just to rule the galaxy, but to fundamentally change what it means to be alive within it. As you prepare to delve deeper into the classified files spread before you, the weight of discovery settles heavily on your shoulders. The truth about the Death Star's core may be more terrible than anyone imagined, but the galaxy deserves to know what was almost unleashed upon them. And so, surrounded by the quiet hum of computers and the distant whisper of hyperspace engines, your team prepares to uncover the darkest secret in Imperial history. The investigation into the Death Star's true purpose is about to begin. Your investigation begins where it must, with the original blueprints discovered in the deepest vaults of Poggle, the Lesser's hive fortress on Geonosis. These weren't the sanitized schematics that made their way into Separatist hands during the Clone Wars. These were the raw, unfiltered designs that emerged from the planet's industrial heart in 22 BBY, and they tell a very different story than what the galaxy has come to believe. Technician Thorne spreads the holographic projections across your workspace, her scarred hands moving with practiced precision as she highlights the discrepancies that first caught her attention. The original Geonosian design shows a battle station, yes, but one fundamentally different from what eventually became the Death Star. Where the Empire's weapon featured a focusing lens and superlaser assembly, Poggle's original concept centered around something he called an energy retention matrix. The Geonosians, master engineers that they were, had been experimenting with sustained energy containment for decades before the Clone Wars began. Their industrial processes required the ability to store massive amounts of power for their droid foundries, and they had developed crystalline storage systems that could hold energy indefinitely without degradation. But these early designs weren't meant for destruction. They were meant for creation, for powering the vast manufacturing complexes that would supply the Separatist war machine. Dr. Vasquez points to specific technical annotations in the original blueprints, notes written in ancient Geonosian script that had never been fully translated until now. The translations reveal something extraordinary. Poggle's engineers weren't just designing energy storage, they were designing energy amplification. Their crystalline matrices could take raw power input and multiply it exponentially, creating what they termed resonant energy cascades that grew stronger the more energy was fed into the system. The breakthrough came when Commander Meridian cross-referenced these technical specifications with intelligence reports from the early days of the Clone Wars. Separatist battle droids powered by Geonosian energy cells displayed unusual characteristics that Republic analysts never fully understood. They seemed to operate more efficiently in groups, as if they were sharing energy rather than consuming it independently. Some Republic commanders reported that destroying one droid in a formation would cause the others to become stronger, not weaker. This effect puzzled Republic military analysts throughout the war, but the answer was hidden in Poggle's original energy matrix designs. The Geonosians had discovered that certain crystalline structures could create what modern physicists would recognize as quantum entanglement on a macro scale. Energy stored in one crystal could be accessed by others in the network, creating a distributed power system that became more efficient as it grew larger. But there was something else in those original blueprints, something that would prove far more significant than anyone realized at the time. Buried deep in the technical specifications, written in Poggle's own hand, were calculations for what he called organic energy integration. The Geonosians had discovered that their energy matrices responded differently when exposed to what they termed life force resonance. The implications of this discovery become clear when you examine the geological surveys that preceded the Death Star's design. Geonosis wasn't chosen as the location for weapons development because of its industrial capacity alone. Deep beneath the planet's surface, Geonosian miners had discovered naturally occurring crystal formations that exhibited properties unlike anything found elsewhere in the galaxy. These crystals didn't just store energy, they seemed to respond to the presence of living beings. Thorne's voice carries a weight of personal experience as she describes her own encounters with similar crystals during her time aboard the Death Star. The station's deeper levels, she explains, housed crystalline formations that hummed with an almost musical resonance when crew members passed nearby. Imperial engineers dismissed this as simple harmonic vibration caused by the station's massive power systems, but Thorne knew better. She had felt something more, a sensation that the crystals were somehow aware of her presence. The original Geonosian research notes describe experiments where these naturally occurring crystals were exposed to various forms of organic matter. Plants grew larger and healthier when placed near the crystal formations. Animals displayed increased intelligence and longevity when exposed to the crystal's energy fields for extended periods. But most significantly, the crystals seemed to store not just the energy from these living beings, but some essential quality of life itself. Poggle's engineers had stumbled upon something that would later catch the attention of forces far darker than the Separatist Alliance. When Count Dooku first reviewed the Geonosian weapon designs, his interest wasn't primarily military. The former Jedi recognized something in those crystal formations that connected to his knowledge of the Force, something that suggested possibilities far beyond conventional warfare. Your team discovers evidence that Dooku made several private visits to Geonosis during the weapon's early development, visits that don't appear in any official Separatist records. During these clandestine trips, he met not with Poggle but with the planet's crystal miners, learning about the formations deep beneath the surface and the strange effects they had on living beings exposed to their influence. The modifications Dooku requested to Poggle's original design weren't tactical improvements. They were fundamental changes to the energy matrix system, alterations that transformed the weapon from a tool of industrial power into something far more complex and dangerous. Where Poggle had envisioned energy storage for manufacturing, Dooku saw the potential for energy harvesting from organic sources. Dr. Vasquez's analysis of the modified blueprints reveals the true scope of these changes. Dooku's alterations increased the size of the central crystal chamber by more than 1,000%, far beyond what would be necessary for weapons applications. He also specified particular types of crystals to be used in the Matrix, crystals that shared properties with the Kyber crystals used in Jedi lightsabers, but exhibited characteristics that no Jedi would recognize. These modified crystals, according to Dooku's private notes, possessed what he called force conductivity. Unlike traditional kyber crystals that responded to a force user's intentions and emotions, these formations seemed capable of absorbing and storing force energy from any living being, regardless of their sensitivity to the force. Dooku had discovered a way to weaponize the very essence of life itself. The implications of this discovery become even more disturbing when you examine the timeline of Dooku's research. His modifications to the Geonosian designs occurred during the same period when he was secretly communicating with his former master, Senator Palpatine. Private communications recovered from Separatist archives show that Dooku was sharing his research with someone he referred to only as the benefactor, someone whose knowledge of force manipulation exceeded even his own. Palpatine's influence on the weapon's development becomes clear through subtle changes in the design specifications that appeared after each of Dooku's private meetings with his mysterious contact. The energy matrix grew larger and more complex, incorporating elements that serve no apparent military purpose but created what can only be described as a force-focusing array of unprecedented size and power. By the time the Clone Wars reached their climax, the weapon that began as Poggle's industrial energy storage system had become something entirely different. The blueprints that eventually made their way to Imperial hands showed a battle station designed not just to destroy planets, but to harvest the force energy released when billions of living beings died simultaneously. The Geonosians, master engineers though they were, never understood what their discovery would eventually become. Their crystalline energy matrices, designed to power droid factories and manufacturing plants, had become the foundation for the most terrifying weapon ever conceived. A weapon designed to feed on life itself, growing stronger with every act of destruction it committed. As your team compiles this evidence, the true scope of the conspiracy begins to emerge. The Death Star wasn't born from Imperial ambition or even Sith hunger for power. It began with a simple industrial discovery on Geonosis, a discovery that caught the attention of beings who saw in those crystalline formations the potential to fundamentally alter the balance of the Force throughout the galaxy. The foundation had been laid. The knowledge had been gathered, and soon, that knowledge would fall into the hands of someone with the vision and the ruthlessness to use it for purposes that would make the destruction of Alderaan seem like a minor tragedy in comparison to what was truly intended. The transformation of Poggle's industrial design into the Empire's ultimate weapon began in the immediate aftermath of the Clone Wars, when Chancellor Palpatine consolidated his power and began reshaping the galaxy according to his grand design. Your investigation reveals that the acquisition of the Death Star plans wasn't the opportunistic seizure of Separatist technology that history records. It was the culmination of a carefully orchestrated plan that had been in motion since before the Clone Wars began. Commander Meridian's analysis of newly declassified Senate records shows that Palpatine had been tracking Geonosian industrial development long before the planet joined the Separatist cause. Trade Federation reports from the years preceding the conflict describe mysterious Senate inquiries about Geonosian mining operations, specifically regarding unusual mineral discoveries in the planet's deeper geological layers. These inquiries came directly from the Chancellor's office, though they were disguised as routine economic assessments. The true scope of Palpatine's interest becomes clear when you examine the Imperial Archive's most sensitive files, documents that were sealed under the highest classification levels and hidden even from most members of the Emperor's inner circle. These files reveal that Palpatine possessed detailed knowledge of the Geonosian crystal formations years before Dooku's modifications to the weapon designs. More disturbing still, they show that he had been conducting his own experiments with similar crystalline structures on worlds throughout the Republic. Dr. Vasquez discovered evidence of these experiments while analyzing Imperial research budgets from the early days of the Empire. Massive funding allocations, hidden within routine military expenditures, were directed towards something called the Organic Energy Research Initiative. The project's official description spoke vaguely of developing new power sources for Imperial infrastructure, but the actual research facilities were located on remote worlds known for their strong connections to the Force. The planets chosen for these experiments tell their own story. Tython, the ancient Jedi homeworld; Korriban, the Sith ancestral stronghold; Dagobah, where the Force flowed with unusual intensity. On each of these worlds, Imperial survey teams established research stations ostensibly designed to study geological formations, but the true nature of their work was far more sinister. Technician Thorne's technical expertise proves invaluable in understanding the equipment deployed to these research stations. The machinery described in Imperial requisition orders wasn't designed for mineral extraction or geological analysis. It was designed for energy absorption and storage, using crystalline matrix technology that bore striking similarities to the formations discovered on Geonosis. These installations were testing grounds, proving concepts that would later be scaled up for integration into the Death Star's design. The transformation of the Death Star, from weapon to what Imperial scientists privately termed an energy collection system, required fundamental changes to every aspect of its design. Where the original Geonosian plans focused on energy storage for industrial purposes, the Imperial modifications created systems for energy extraction, concentration, and redirection toward purposes that remained classified even within the project's own documentation. Your team uncovers evidence of the selection process for Imperial scientists assigned to Death Star development. Unlike typical military projects that prioritized conventional engineering expertise, the Death Star project actively recruited researchers with backgrounds in what Imperial classifications termed exotic energy phenomena. Many of these scientists had conducted research into the Force, though their work was disguised as studies of bioelectromagnetic fields and organic energy resonance. The most revealing documents come from the personal archives of Director Krennic, recovered from his private estate after his death at Scarif. These files show that Krennic himself didn't fully understand the true purpose of the weapon he was tasked with constructing. His communications with the Emperor speak of unlocking the station's complete potential and secondary applications beyond conventional destruction, but it's clear that he was being kept deliberately ignorant of the project's ultimate goals. The Emperor's personal involvement in the Death Star's development went far beyond what any official records indicated. Private meeting logs recovered from Imperial Palace archives show regular consultations between Palpatine and individuals identified only by code designations. These meetings occurred in the palace's deepest levels, in chambers that were shielded against all forms of electronic surveillance and protected by Force-based concealment techniques that would be invisible to conventional security measures. Cross-referencing these meeting records with Imperial personnel files reveals a disturbing pattern. Many of the individuals who met privately with the Emperor were scientists and researchers who had previously worked on the Organic Energy Research Initiative. Others were identified as Force consultants, individuals whose official positions within the Imperial hierarchy were deliberately obscured, but whose expertise clearly related to manipulation of the Force itself. The modifications implemented in the Imperial version of the Death Star created what can only be described as a Force-focusing array of unprecedented scale and complexity. The station's massive size wasn't necessary for its destructive capabilities alone. The bulk of the Death Star's internal volume was dedicated to crystalline matrix chambers, energy storage systems, and what Imperial technical manuals euphemistically termed organic resonance amplifiers. Dr. Vasquez's analysis reveals that these amplifiers were designed to detect, capture, and concentrate the Force energy released when living beings died. The technology built upon the natural properties of the Geonosian crystals, but incorporated advances that could only have come from deep understanding of how the Force operates at a fundamental level. The Death Star wasn't just a weapon that could destroy planets, it was a harvesting machine designed to capture the spiritual essence of every living being killed in its attacks. The construction timeline for the Death Star reflects these priorities. While public Imperial propaganda emphasized the station's tactical capabilities and the speed with which it could be deployed against rebel targets, the actual construction focused overwhelmingly on the internal energy systems. Technical progress reports show that the superlaser assembly was completed years before the crystalline matrix chambers reached operational status, indicating that the weapon's conventional destructive capability was considered secondary to its energy harvesting function. Perhaps most disturbing is the evidence of testing conducted during the Death Star's construction phase. Imperial records describe calibration exercises conducted against small asteroids and uninhabited worlds, ostensibly to verify the station's targeting systems and destructive capability. However, analysis of these test records reveals that the targets weren't chosen randomly. Each was selected for its mineral composition, specifically the presence of crystalline formations similar to those found on Geonosis. The results of these tests were carefully monitored and analyzed, but not for the tactical data that might be expected from weapons testing. Imperial scientists were measuring energy absorption rates, storage efficiency, and what they termed resonance propagation patterns. They were perfecting a system designed to extract and store the force energy from living worlds on a galactic scale. The Emperor's ultimate vision for the Death Star becomes clear through recovered fragments of his private correspondence. He wasn't building a single superweapon. He was creating the prototype for a fleet of energy-harvesting stations that would systematically drain the life force from every inhabited world in the galaxy. Each station would feed energy to the others, creating a network that would concentrate the force power of trillions of living beings into a single controllable source. The implications of this discovery chill your investigation team to their core. The Death Star, that terrorized the galaxy during the Galactic Civil War, was merely the beginning. Had the Emperor's plans succeeded, the battle station would have been the first of many, each one more powerful than the last, as they fed on the accumulated energy of destroyed civilizations. As your team processes this information, the true scope of what Luke Skywalker prevented at the Battle of Yavin becomes clear. He didn't just destroy a weapon, he shattered the cornerstone of a plan that would have transformed the Emperor into something beyond mortal understanding. A being sustained by the life force of an entire galaxy, wielding power that could reshape reality itself according to his will. The true horror of the Death Star's purpose begins to reveal itself through the personal logs of Galen Erso, recovered from hidden data caches that the brilliant scientist concealed within the very structure of the weapon he was forced to create. These logs, encrypted using crystallographic techniques that took your team months to decode, tell the story of a man who gradually realized he was building something far more terrible than a mere weapon of mass destruction. Erso's early entries, dating from his recruitment by director Krennic, show the excitement of a scientist given unlimited resources to pursue clean energy research on a galactic scale. His initial work focused on harnessing the natural properties of kyber crystals to create sustainable power sources that could supply entire star systems without the environmental destruction caused by conventional reactors. The Imperial Energy Initiative, as it was originally presented to him, promised to revolutionize civilization itself. But Galen Erso was too brilliant to remain ignorant of his work's true implications for long. His personal logs document a growing sense of unease as he delved deeper into the crystalline energy systems he was developing. The power output calculations didn't match any conceivable civilian application. The energy-focusing arrays he was designing could generate destructive force measured not in megatons, but in planetary masses. Even more disturbing, his research was being guided toward applications that seemed to violate fundamental principles of physics. Dr. Vasquez's analysis of Erso's technical specifications reveals the moment when the scientist began to understand what he was truly creating. His calculations for kyber crystal resonance patterns showed energy outputs that exceeded theoretical maximums for conventional matter-energy conversion. The crystals weren't just focusing energy, they were amplifying it through processes that drew power from sources beyond the physical materials being consumed. The breakthrough in understanding came when Erso began studying the behavioral patterns of kyber crystals under different experimental conditions. Traditional Jedi teaching held that kyber crystals were living extensions of the Force, responsive to the emotions and intentions of Force-sensitive individuals. But Erso's research revealed that the crystals were capable of much more complex interactions with organic life than anyone had previously understood. His private laboratory notes describe experiments where kyber crystals exhibited what he termed sympathetic resonance with nearby living organisms. Plants placed near active crystal arrays grew faster and larger than control specimens. Small animals exposed to crystal energy fields displayed enhanced intelligence and extended lifespans. Most significantly, the crystals seemed to store not just the energy from these interactions, but information patterns that suggested they were recording the essential characteristics of the life forms they encountered. Erso's growing horror becomes palpable in his later log entries as he realizes that his energy amplification systems weren't just drawing power from conventional sources. The crystalline matrices he had designed were creating what he called life force absorption cascades, energy feedback loops that became more powerful when exposed to large populations of living beings. The Death Star's power systems were designed to feed on life itself. The scientist's attempts to sabotage his own work began subtly, with minor inefficiencies introduced into the crystal focusing systems and deliberate instabilities built into the energy transfer networks. The thermal exhaust port that would eventually provide Luke Skywalker with his target wasn't Erso's only sabotage, merely the most obvious. His real masterpiece was a cascade failure system buried deep within the Death Star's crystalline matrix chambers, a flaw that would prevent the station from achieving its true operational capacity. But Erso's most important discovery, and the one that would ultimately damn his conscience forever, came when he began to understand the selection criteria for the Death Star's intended targets. Imperial tactical analyses presented to him spoke of strategic value and symbolic significance, but the underlying data told a different story. Every target under consideration shared specific characteristics related to what Imperial scientists euphemistically termed organic energy density. The worlds being considered for destruction weren't chosen for their military value or political significance. They were chosen for their populations of Force-sensitive individuals, for the presence of ancient Jedi or Sith sites, for geological formations that would enhance the energy absorption process. The Death Star was being aimed at the galaxy's most spiritually significant locations, places where the destruction of life would yield the maximum harvest of Force energy. Alderaan's selection as the first target makes horrifying sense when viewed through this lens. The peaceful world wasn't just Princess Leia's homeworld or a symbol of the rebellion. It was home to a hidden community of Force sensitives who had maintained their traditions in secret since the Jedi Purge. Ancient Jedi archives, thought destroyed during Order 66, had been preserved in hidden sanctuaries beneath Alderaan's royal palace. The planet's destruction would provide not just political intimidation, but a massive influx of Force energy to power the Emperor's greater design. Erso's logs document his desperate attempts to warn the rebellion about the Death Star's true capabilities. His communications with Saw Gerrera weren't just about the station's destructive power. They included encoded warnings about the energy harvesting systems and their implications for Force-sensitive individuals throughout the galaxy. Most of these warnings were dismissed as the ravings of a guilt-ridden scientist, but some rebel intelligence analysts began to piece together their true significance. The personal cost of this knowledge weighs heavily on Erso throughout his final log entries. He describes nightmares where he can feel the life force being drained from entire worlds, visions of the galaxy slowly dying as the Death Star network feeds on civilization itself. His work hasn't just created a weapon, it has created an abomination that threatens the spiritual foundation of all life in the galaxy. Technician Thorne's first-hand experience aboard the Death Star confirms many of Erso's worst fears. Her access to the station's deeper levels during routine maintenance operations brought her into contact with the crystalline matrix chambers that formed the heart of the energy absorption system. These vast spaces, filled with formations of synthetic kyber crystals arranged in complex geometric patterns, hummed with a resonance that seemed to respond to the presence of living beings. Thorne describes the sensation of working in these chambers as profoundly disturbing. The crystals seemed to pulse with their own rhythm, a beat that gradually synchronized with her own heartbeat and breathing patterns. Other technicians reported similar experiences, along with vivid dreams and flashes of insight that suggested the crystals were somehow sharing information or memories from other sources. Most disturbing were the reports from crew members who worked in the Matrix chambers during the Death Star's attack on Alderaan. Multiple witnesses described the crystals blazing with unprecedented brightness during the planet's destruction, their resonance shifting to frequencies that caused physical pain in anyone nearby. Several technicians were hospitalized with symptoms that Imperial medical officers couldn't explain, symptoms that resembled what ancient texts described as force drain or life force exhaustion. The energy readings recorded during Alderaan's destruction, buried deep in the Death Star's technical logs, support Erso's worst theories about the station's true function. The power levels generated during the attack far exceeded what would be necessary for simple planetary destruction. The excess energy was channeled into the crystalline storage matrices, where it remained available for purposes that remain classified even in the most sensitive Imperial documents. Erso's final log entry, recorded shortly before his death on Adu, contains a message intended for his daughter Jin and any rebels who might eventually uncover his work. In it, he expresses his hope that the sabotage systems he built into the Death Star will prevent the station from achieving its full operational capacity, but he acknowledges that his efforts may not be sufficient to stop what he has helped create. His last words carry a warning that would prove prophetic. The Death Star wasn't the end of the Emperor's plan, it was merely the beginning. If the station succeeded in its true mission, if it managed to harvest the Force energy from enough inhabited worlds, it would become the template for a fleet of such weapons. The galaxy would face not just political domination, but spiritual extinction on a scale that would make the Jedi Purge seem like a minor historical footnote. As your investigation team processes Erso's revelations, the full scope of what the galaxy faced during the Galactic Civil War becomes terrifyingly clear. The rebellion wasn't just fighting for political freedom, they were fighting for the survival of the Force itself. The stakes of every battle, every sacrifice, every moment of heroism were far greater than anyone realized at the time. Galen Erso died, believing that his sabotage might not be enough to stop what he had helped create. He never knew that his daughter would carry his message to the rebels, that his warnings would guide them to the Death Star's weakness, and that his sacrifice would ultimately save not just the rebellion, but the spiritual essence of every living being in the galaxy. The destruction of Alderaan has been analyzed countless times by military historians, political scientists, and strategic analysts throughout the galaxy. The conventional understanding presents it as a calculated act of terror, Grand Moff Tarkin's demonstration of Imperial power designed to crush the rebellion's spirit and force Princess Leia to reveal the location of the hidden rebel base. But your investigation team's analysis of classified Imperial sensor data tells a fundamentally different story, one that reveals the true criteria behind Alderaan's selection as the Death Star's first target. Commander Meridian's examination of Imperial tactical assessments from the period leading up to Alderaan's destruction shows that the planet wasn't chosen randomly from a list of rebel-sympathizing worlds. The target selection process was far more complex and deliberate than anyone realized. Deep within Imperial Strategic Command archives, your team discovers comprehensive surveys of dozens of potential targets, each evaluated according to criteria that had nothing to do with conventional military strategy. The surveys evaluated each world's population density, but not in terms of economic or industrial capacity. Imperial analysts were measuring what they termed bioelectromagnetic resonance patterns, calculating the force sensitivity levels of entire planetary populations using techniques that remain classified even in these recovered documents. Alderaan scored extraordinarily high in these measurements, far beyond what would be expected from a peaceful, diplomatically oriented civilization. Dr. Vasquez's analysis of the sensor data reveals why. Hidden beneath Alderaan's serene surface was a network of force-sensitive communities that had maintained their traditions in secret since the rise of the Empire. These weren't organized groups of former Jedi or formal force-using sects. They were ordinary families and individuals who possessed natural sensitivity to the Force, but had learned to conceal their abilities to survive the Imperial purges. The planetary surveys also identified geological anomalies beneath Alderaan's major cities that bore striking similarities to the crystalline formations discovered on Geonosis. Ancient excavations dating back thousands of years to the planet's early colonization period had uncovered naturally occurring kyber crystal deposits that the settlers had incorporated into their architectural foundations. The city of Alderaan itself was built upon a vast network of these crystal formations, creating what Imperial scientists recognized as a natural force amplification matrix. But the most disturbing aspect of Alderaan's selection becomes clear when you examine the timing of its destruction in relation to the Death Star's operational requirements. Technician Thorne's technical analysis shows that the station's crystalline matrix chambers weren't fully operational during the attack on Alderaan. The energy absorption systems were still in their testing phase, operating at only a fraction of their designed capacity. Yet Imperial records show that the attack proceeded exactly as scheduled, despite the station's incomplete readiness. The reason becomes apparent when you examine the Death Star's energy readings during Alderaan's destruction. The massive influx of force energy released by the simultaneous death of 2 billion force-sensitive beings provided exactly the power surge needed to bring the station's absorption systems online. Alderaan wasn't just the Death Star's first target. It was the station's activation key. The planet's destruction served as both a field test and a power source for the weapon's true capabilities. Imperial sensor logs from the moments surrounding Alderaan's destruction record energy phenomena that don't match any known physics of planetary annihilation. The superlaser's destructive beam lasted for 2.7 seconds, far longer than would be necessary to trigger a planetary chain reaction. During those additional seconds, sensors detected massive energy flows moving not away from the destruction site, but toward the Death Star itself. The station was literally feeding on the death of an entire world. The crew members present during Alderaan's destruction reported experiences that Imperial medical officers dismissed as stress reactions to witnessing unprecedented destruction. But when cross-referenced with similar reports from other Imperial operations, a pattern emerges that suggests something far more significant was occurring. Personnel throughout the Death Star described momentary sensations of overwhelming sadness, flashes of unfamiliar memories, and brief episodes where they felt connected to experiences that weren't their own. These weren't random psychological symptoms. They were the result of the Death Star's absorption systems channeling the final thoughts and emotions of Alderaan's population through the station's crystalline matrix network. For a brief moment during the planet's destruction, every person aboard the Death Star experienced fragments of the collective consciousness of 2 billion dying beings. The psychological impact of this phenomenon was so severe that Imperial Command ordered memory suppression treatments for most of the crew. The energy storage readings taken after Alderaan's destruction show that the Death Star's power levels increased by more than 400%, far beyond what could be explained by conventional fuel consumption or reactor output. This energy wasn't being used to power the station's conventional systems. It was being stored in the crystalline matrix chambers for purposes that remained classified even within the Death Star project itself. Your team's analysis reveals that similar energy spikes occurred during other Death Star operations that have been largely forgotten by galactic history. The destruction of the Imperial prison world of Despair during the station's construction phase. The obliteration of several uninhabited worlds during weapons testing. Each of these attacks followed the same pattern of extended beam duration and massive energy absorption, suggesting that the Death Star was systematically harvesting force energy from every target it destroyed. The selection of these secondary targets becomes more disturbing when examined in detail. Despair housed thousands of political prisoners, many of whom were former Jedi or Force-sensitive individuals captured during the Imperial purges. The uninhabited worlds used for weapons testing were all located on ancient hyperspace routes that had been significant to Force-using cultures throughout galactic history. None of these targets were chosen for their strategic value. They were chosen for their potential to provide the Death Star with the specific type of energy it was designed to harvest. Princess Leia's presence aboard the Death Star during Alderaan's destruction takes on new significance when viewed through this lens. Her Force sensitivity, though untrained and largely unconscious at the time, made her particularly vulnerable to the psychic shock of her homeworld's destruction. Imperial records describe her collapse not as emotional trauma, but as bio-electromagnetic system overload, medical terminology that suggests Imperial physicians understood they were dealing with Force-related phenomena. The interrogation techniques used on Leia before Alderaan's destruction also reveal Imperial knowledge of Force manipulation. The mind probe employed by Imperial interrogators wasn't just designed to extract information, it was calibrated to measure her Force sensitivity and determine her potential value as what Imperial scientists termed organic energy source material. Her rescue by Luke Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi prevented her from becoming another component in the Death Star's energy harvesting system. The aftermath of Alderaan's destruction saw unprecedented changes in Imperial policy regarding Force-sensitive individuals throughout the galaxy. Systematic roundups of suspected Force users increased dramatically, but these individuals weren't being executed or imprisoned in conventional facilities. They were being transported to classified locations where their ultimate fate remains unknown. The Imperial bureaucracy had learned from Alderaan's destruction that Force-sensitive beings represented a valuable resource that could be harvested more efficiently than through planetary annihilation. As your investigation team processes these revelations, the true horror of what occurred at Alderaan becomes clear. The galaxy mourned the loss of a peaceful world and 2 billion innocent lives, but they never understood that those deaths served a purpose far more terrible than political intimidation. Alderaan's destruction was the first successful test of a system designed to harvest the spiritual essence of entire civilizations, converting the Force energy of billions of living beings into power that could be wielded by the Empire's Dark Masters. The Death Star that emerged from Alderaan's ashes wasn't the same weapon that had approached the peaceful world hours earlier. It had been transformed into something far more dangerous, a predator that had tasted the life force of an entire planet and now hungered for more. The investigation takes a chilling turn when your team begins analyzing the full scope of Death Star targeting data recovered from Imperial Strategic Command archives. What initially appeared to be random acts of Imperial aggression reveals itself as a carefully orchestrated campaign with selection criteria that have nothing to do with conventional military strategy. The pattern that emerges suggests a level of planning and purpose that transforms every Death Star operation from an act of war into something approaching ritualistic harvesting. Commander Meridian's expertise in intelligence analysis proves crucial as he maps the connections between target worlds that Imperial strategists had identified for future Death Star operations. The list recovered from Tarkin's personal files contains over 200 potential targets across the galaxy, each evaluated according to a complex scoring system that weighs factors never mentioned in public Imperial doctrine. Population density receives consideration, but not in terms of economic or industrial capacity. The Imperial analysts were measuring something they referred to as spiritual infrastructure value. Dr. Vasquez's examination of these targeting assessments reveals the scientific methodology behind the Empire's selection process. Each potential target world underwent extensive surveys using sensor technology specifically designed to detect what Imperial scientists termed force resonance signatures. These weren't crude measurements of individual force sensitivity, but sophisticated analyses of how the force flowed through entire planetary ecosystems, influenced by geological formations, historical events, and the collective consciousness of their inhabitants. The results of these surveys create a disturbing picture of Imperial priorities. Worlds with strong industrial capacity or strategic military value ranked surprisingly low on the target lists, unless they also possessed significant force-related characteristics. Meanwhile, seemingly insignificant worlds with small populations scored extremely high when they happened to be located on ancient Jedi pilgrimage routes or contained ruins from Force-using civilizations. Jedha provides the most obvious example of this targeting philosophy in action. The Holy City's destruction during the Death Star's testing phase wasn't motivated by its role in rebel operations or its strategic importance to the Empire's supply lines. Jedha was chosen because it represented the single greatest concentration of kyber crystals in the known galaxy, crystals that had been sacred to Force-using cultures for millennia. The city's population included not just rebel sympathizers, but pilgrims, mystics, and spiritual seekers from across the galaxy who had come to meditate in the presence of the Force-reactive crystals. The energy readings recorded during Jedha's partial destruction reveal the true purpose behind the attack. Imperial sensors detected massive Force energy discharges as the Holy City's kyber crystal deposits were vaporized, along with the population that had gathered around them. But rather than dissipating into space, this energy was channeled toward the Death Star through focusing arrays that had been positioned specifically to capture and redirect the spiritual essence released during the crystal's destruction. Technician Thorne's analysis of the Death Star's internal systems during the Jedha operation shows crystalline matrix chambers operating at near maximum capacity for the first time since the station's construction began. The energy absorbed from Jedha's destruction provided a massive surge of power that was immediately channeled into the station's deep storage systems, power that would later be available for purposes that remained classified even within the Death Star project documentation. The incomplete nature of Jedha's destruction takes on new significance when viewed through this lens. The Death Star's attack devastated the Holy City and its surrounding areas, but it deliberately spared the planet's other population centers and industrial facilities. This wasn't mercy or strategic calculation. The partial destruction maximized the Force energy harvest while preserving the planet's remaining kyber crystal deposits for future exploitation. Jedha had been marked not for complete annihilation but for systematic harvesting over an extended period. Scarif's targeting reveals another aspect of Imperial selection criteria that had nothing to do with the planet's role as a data storage facility for the Death Star project. The tropical world's natural beauty and serene environment weren't incidental characteristics. They were indicators of what Imperial surveys identified as Force harmony resonance. Planets where the Force flowed in natural balance, untroubled by conflict or ecological disruption, generated specific energy signatures that made them particularly valuable targets for the Death Star's absorption systems. The Imperial facility on Scarif wasn't just storing Death Star technical data, it was conducting ongoing research into Force energy harvesting techniques using the planet's natural Force resonance as a testing ground. Hidden research stations throughout Scarif's tropical archipelagos were experimenting with smaller-scale versions of the Death Star's crystalline matrix technology, proving concepts that would later be integrated into the main weapon's design. Your investigation reveals that the rebel assault on Scarif inadvertently disrupted experiments that had been underway for years. Imperial research logs describe successful tests of ambient force absorption using crystalline arrays positioned throughout the planet's most force-sensitive locations. These installations were harvesting energy from Scarif's entire ecosystem, slowly draining the planet's spiritual essence to power Imperial research into larger-scale force manipulation techniques. The pattern extends beyond worlds that were actually attacked or threatened by the Death Star. Imperial survey data shows that hundreds of additional worlds throughout the galaxy were being systematically evaluated for their force energy potential. These surveys weren't conducted by military reconnaissance units, but by specialized teams that included individuals with backgrounds in archaeology, xenobiology, and what Imperial classifications termed spiritual anthropology. The survey teams were mapping the galaxy's force-sensitive locations with unprecedented precision, identifying not just inhabited worlds but ancient ruins, meditation sites, former battlefields where force users had died, and even uninhabited planets where the force flowed with unusual intensity. Each location was evaluated for its potential contribution to what Imperial documents referred to as the Galactic Energy Integration Project. This project's scope becomes clear through fragmentary references scattered throughout Imperial archives. The Death Star wasn't intended to be a single weapon targeting individual worlds, but the centerpiece of a network that would systematically harvest force energy from across the entire galaxy. Multiple Death Stars would be positioned at strategic points throughout known space, their combined absorption capabilities creating a web of spiritual extraction that would drain the force from every inhabited system. The geological surveys conducted on targeted worlds reveal another disturbing aspect of Imperial planning. Worlds chosen for Death Star operations invariably contained underground crystalline formations similar to those discovered on Geonosis, natural structures that could amplify and focus force energy. The Empire wasn't just targeting populated worlds, they were targeting the galaxy's natural force nexus points, locations where the spiritual energy of entire star systems converged. Dr. Vasquez's analysis suggests that destroying these nexus points would have consequences extending far beyond the immediate loss of life. The force flows through the galaxy along specific pathways, connecting living beings and maintaining the spiritual balance that sustains all life. Systematic destruction of the galaxy's force nexus points would gradually weaken these connections, slowly draining the spiritual vitality from every inhabited world, whether they were directly attacked or not. The targeting data also reveals Imperial awareness of force-sensitive bloodlines that had survived the Jedi Purge. Worlds with higher-than-average populations of force-sensitive individuals received priority ratings regardless of their political alignment or strategic value. The Empire was systematically identifying and cataloging every genetic line that carried strong force potential, preparing for harvest operations that would eliminate these bloodlines while channeling their spiritual essence into the Death Star's storage systems. Perhaps most chilling is the evidence of Imperial cooperation with surviving Sith cultists and Dark Force users throughout the galaxy. Communication intercepts show that the Empire was receiving intelligence about force-sensitive locations from individuals who possessed intimate knowledge of force phenomena but weren't part of the official Imperial hierarchy. These shadow advisors were providing targeting recommendations based on their understanding of how force energy could be harvested and manipulated on a galactic scale. As your investigation team processes this evidence, the true scope of what the galaxy faced during the Imperial era becomes terrifyingly clear. The Death Star operations that the galaxy witnessed were merely the beginning of a campaign that would have systematically drained the force from every inhabited world. The Empire wasn't just seeking political domination, they were preparing to commit spiritual genocide on a scale that would transform the galaxy into a lifeless wasteland drained of the energy that connects all living things. The pattern reveals a level of malevolent planning that extends far beyond conventional tyranny. The Empire had identified the galaxy's spiritual infrastructure and was systematically targeting it for destruction, harvesting the force energy of entire civilizations to power ambitions that would make the destruction of Alderaan seem like a minor tragedy in comparison to what was truly intended. The deeper your investigation delves into the Death Star's crystalline matrix systems, the more apparent it becomes that the Empire's understanding of kyber crystal technology far exceeded anything the Jedi had ever documented. Vasquez's analysis of recovered Imperial research data reveals that Imperial scientists had unlocked properties of kyber crystals that transformed them from simple force-focusing tools into something approaching technological necromancy, capable of storing and manipulating the spiritual essence of living beings on an unprecedented scale. Galen Erso's complete research archive, hidden within the Death Star's own databanks using crystallographic encryption techniques, provides the most comprehensive documentation of how the Empire perverted kyber crystal technology for their dark purposes. His early work, conducted under the assumption that he was developing clean energy applications, inadvertently laid the groundwork for discoveries that would horrify him once their true implications became clear. Traditional Jedi understanding held that kyber crystals were living extensions of the Force, naturally attuned to the spiritual energy that flowed through all living things. A Jedi's lightsaber crystal would bond with its wielder, responding to their emotions and intentions while maintaining a harmonious relationship with the Force. But Imperial research revealed that kyber crystals possessed far more complex capabilities than the Jedi had ever realized or perhaps had chosen not to explore. The breakthrough that would eventually lead to the Death Star's energy harvesting capabilities came when Imperial scientists discovered that kyber crystals could be artificially induced to resonate with force energy patterns from sources other than their original bonded users, through processes that Erso's notes describe as sympathetic frequency manipulation. Synthetic kyber crystals could be programmed to absorb and store force energy from any living being, regardless of their force sensitivity or conscious connection to the crystal. These synthetic crystals, manufactured in Imperial facilities using technology reverse-engineered from ancient Sith artifacts, possessed properties that natural kyber crystals could never exhibit. Where natural crystals maintained harmonious relationships with the Force, synthetic crystals acted as spiritual parasites, actively drawing force energy from their surroundings and storing it in crystalline matrices that could be accessed and manipulated by technological means. The Death Star's massive kyber crystal array wasn't constructed using traditional crystals gathered from sacred sites like Elam or Jedha. Imperial manufacturing facilities had produced thousands of these synthetic parasitic crystals, each one calibrated to specific force energy frequencies and arranged in geometric patterns that amplified their absorption capabilities exponentially. The result was a crystalline network that could drain the spiritual essence from entire planetary populations during the brief moments of their destruction. Technician Thorne's first-hand experience with these synthetic crystals aboard the Death Star provides disturbing insights into their behavioral characteristics. Unlike natural kyber crystals, which hummed with peaceful energy that promoted meditation and spiritual reflection, the synthetic crystals produced sounds that crew members described as almost organic, like whispers or breathing. Personnel working near the crystal arrays reported dreams filled with unfamiliar voices and memories that didn't belong to them. The synthetic crystals were somehow storing not just the energy from destroyed lives, but fragments of consciousness itself. Imperial research notes describe successful experiments in consciousness archaeology, where information and memories could be extracted from crystal matrices that had absorbed force energy during traumatic events. The Death Star wasn't just killing its victims, it was preserving aspects of their minds and experiences within its crystalline storage systems. The implications of this technology extend far beyond energy storage. Imperial scientists had essentially created a method for technological immortality, where consciousness could be transferred from organic beings into crystalline matrices and preserved indefinitely. But unlike the natural spiritual transcendence that Jedi achieved through unity with the Force, this process created what Imperial documents termed synthetic Force ghosts, consciousness patterns trapped within crystal structures and subject to technological manipulation. Dr. Vasquez's analysis reveals that the Death Star's crystal arrays contained consciousness fragments from every target the weapon had destroyed. The memories and experiences of Alderaan's 2 billion inhabitants were stored within the station's crystalline matrices, along with the consciousness patterns from Jedha's pilgrims, Scarif's researchers, and countless other victims of Imperial Force energy harvesting operations. The Death Star had become a technological tomb containing the trapped souls of entire civilizations. The process of Force energy extraction wasn't limited to moments of destruction. Imperial research facilities throughout the galaxy were conducting experiments with smaller-scale versions of the Death Star's crystalline technology, slowly harvesting Force energy from captive Force-sensitive individuals over extended periods. These facilities, disguised as Imperial medical research stations or prisoner rehabilitation centers, were systematically draining the spiritual essence from their subjects while leaving them physically alive but spiritually hollow. The Empire's network of Inquisitors played a crucial role in this harvesting operation, though most of them remained ignorant of their true purpose. The Inquisitors believed they were hunting down surviving Jedi and Force-sensitive individuals to prevent the formation of new rebel cells, but their actual function was to identify and capture Force users for the Empire's energy extraction experiments. The distinctive lightsabers wielded by Inquisitors contained synthetic kyber crystals that recorded detailed information about every Force user they encountered. The Grand Inquisitor's personal archives, recovered from the wreckage of his command ship, reveal the true scope of the Empire's Force user cataloging project. Detailed profiles of thousands of Force-sensitive individuals throughout the galaxy, complete with assessments of their energy potential and recommendations for harvest scheduling. The Empire had created a galaxy-wide database of spiritual resources, treating Force users like minerals to be extracted rather than living beings to be preserved. The connection between the Death Star's operations and these smaller-scale harvesting facilities becomes clear through Imperial logistics records. Energy readings from prisoner facilities showed consistent patterns of spiritual drain that corresponded with increased power levels aboard the Death Star, suggesting that the station was somehow connected to the Empire's entire Force harvesting network. The Death Star wasn't just a single weapon, it was the central hub of a galaxy-spanning system designed to concentrate spiritual energy from across known space. The synthetic kyber crystals aboard the Death Star were programmed with what Imperial scientists termed resonance cascades, frequency patterns that allowed them to amplify and redirect Force energy across vast distances. This technology enabled the Death Star to draw power, not just from its immediate targets, but from Imperial facilities throughout the galaxy, where Force energy was being systematically extracted from captive populations. Perhaps most disturbing is the evidence that Imperial scientists were experimenting with using this trapped consciousness to power artificial intelligence systems. Research notes describe successful tests where synthetic kyber crystals containing consciousness fragments were used to create what Imperial documents termed organic processing matrices, computer systems that could think and reason using the stored memories and experiences of deceased Force users. The ultimate application of this technology becomes apparent through fragmentary references to something Imperial scientists called the Eternal Network. This project envisioned connecting all synthetic kyber crystal installations throughout the galaxy into a single consciousness matrix, creating an artificial mind powered by the spiritual essence of every living being the Empire had destroyed or captured. The Death Star would serve as the central processing core for this galactic artificial intelligence, with the Emperor serving as its supreme controller. The scope of this project required massive amounts of force energy, far more than could be obtained through the destruction of individual worlds or the capture of scattered force users. The Empire needed a systematic approach that could harvest spiritual essence from the galaxy's entire population, and the Death Star network represented the most efficient method for achieving this goal. Each Death Star would serve as both a harvesting station and a processing center, systematically draining entire star systems of their spiritual vitality. Your investigation team's analysis reveals that the Empire was closer to achieving this goal than anyone realized. The Death Star's successful operations had provided enough force energy to begin construction of the synthetic consciousness matrix, and Imperial facilities throughout the galaxy were preparing to implement the final phase of the Eternal Network project. The galaxy stood on the brink of spiritual slavery, on a scale that would have made physical oppression seem insignificant by comparison. As the evidence mounts, the true horror of what Luke Skywalker prevented at the Battle of Yavin becomes clear. He didn't just destroy a weapon or save the rebellion, he shattered the cornerstone of a project that would have transformed every living being in the galaxy into a component of an artificial consciousness controlled by the Empire's Dark Masters. The Death Star's destruction released not just its stored energy, but the trapped consciousness of millions of beings back to the Force where they belonged. The investigation reaches its most disturbing revelations when your team gains access to Emperor Palpatine's private research archives, recovered from the deepest vaults beneath the Imperial Palace on Coruscant. These documents, sealed behind layers of Sith alchemy and technological encryption that took months to penetrate, reveal the true architect of the Death Star's horrifying purpose and the scope of ambitions that extend far beyond galactic domination into realms that challenge the very nature of life and death. Palpatine's personal journals, written in ancient Sith script and protected by Force-based concealment techniques, document decades of research into what he termed organic Force manipulation. His studies began long before his rise to political power, drawing upon knowledge inherited from his master Darth Plagueis and expanded through his own experiments with the fundamental forces that govern life throughout the galaxy. The Death Star wasn't conceived as a weapon of war, but as the ultimate tool for achieving what Palpatine saw as his destiny to transcend the limitations of mortal existence. Dr. Vasquez's analysis of Palpatine's theoretical calculations reveals a level of scientific understanding that exceeded even the most advanced Imperial research facilities. His grasp of Force phenomena approached the technological rather than the mystical, treating the spiritual energy that connected all living beings as a quantifiable resource that could be harvested, stored, and redistributed according to his will. The Death Star represented the practical application of theories that Palpatine had been developing since his earliest training under Darth Plagueis. The Emperor's ultimate goal becomes clear through research notes that describe his vision of what he called Force singularity. By systematically harvesting the spiritual essence of every living being in the galaxy, Palpatine intended to concentrate all Force energy into a single source that he could control absolutely. This wouldn't simply make him the most powerful Force user in galactic history. It would fundamentally alter the nature of existence itself, creating a reality where he controlled not just political power, but the very essence of life. Technician Thorne's technical expertise proves crucial in understanding the engineering specifications that Palpatine personally added to the Death Star's design. Hidden within the station's blueprints are modifications that serve no apparent tactical purpose but create what Imperial scientists termed consciousness integration chambers. These specialized facilities, located in the Death Star's most heavily shielded sections, were designed to channel the harvested Force energy directly into Palpatine himself during the process of planetary destruction. The Emperor's private communications with Death Star project leaders reveal his growing impatience with the weapon's conventional applications. Messages recovered from Director Krennic's personal archives show Palpatine expressing frustration with military commanders who viewed the Death Star primarily as a tool of intimidation rather than the spiritual harvesting device it was designed to be. He repeatedly emphasized that the station's true value lay not in its ability to destroy rebellious worlds, but in its capacity to feed his growing hunger for Force energy. Commander Meridian's intelligence analysis uncovers evidence of secret Imperial facilities designed to support Palpatine's Force absorption experiments. These installations, hidden on remote worlds throughout the Outer Rim, served as testing grounds for the energy harvesting techniques that would later be integrated into the Death Star's systems. Captive populations of Force-sensitive individuals were subjected to experimental procedures that slowly drained their spiritual essence while keeping them physically alive, providing Palpatine with a steady supply of Force energy to fuel his research. The scope of these experiments becomes apparent through Imperial medical records that document systematic Force energy extraction from thousands of subjects over a period of years. The procedures weren't designed for immediate energy harvest, but for sustained spiritual drain that could continue indefinitely. Palpatine was creating what his research notes describe as living batteries, Force-sensitive beings reduced to empty shells whose only purpose was to generate spiritual energy for his consumption. The Death Star's operational procedures were specifically designed to maximize Palpatine's personal energy gain from each planetary destruction. Imperial tactical manuals describe optimal destruction sequences that prolong the dying process of targeted worlds, ensuring that the maximum amount of Force energy could be extracted during the population's final moments. The Emperor wasn't just destroying his enemies, he was literally feeding on their deaths to sustain and enhance his own power. Dr. Vasquez's examination of the Death Star's internal systems reveals that the station contained private chambers designed exclusively for Palpatine's use during destruction operations. These facilities, shielded against detection by conventional sensors, included meditation chambers surrounded by synthetic kyber crystal arrays that would channel harvested Force energy directly into his body. The Emperor intended to be present aboard the Death Star during major operations, personally consuming the spiritual essence of entire civilizations as they died. The targeting priorities that emerge from Palpatine's personal involvement in Death Star operations reflect his specific hunger for particular types of Force energy. Worlds with strong Jedi connections received the highest priority ratings not because of their strategic value, but because populations that had been exposed to light-side Force traditions generated energy that Palpatine found particularly nourishing. The destruction of former Jedi strongholds provided him with spiritual sustenance that enhanced his power far beyond what he could gain from ordinary populations. The Emperor's research into Force energy absorption wasn't limited to external sources. His private journals describe experimental procedures performed on his own body, using synthetic kyber crystal implants to enhance his capacity for storing and channeling harvested spiritual energy. These modifications, conducted in secret medical facilities beneath the Imperial Palace, gradually transformed Palpatine from a powerful Force user into something approaching a technological parasite capable of consuming the life force of entire star systems. The transformation process wasn't without consequences for Palpatine's physical form. Imperial medical records describe progressive deterioration of his organic tissues as they struggled to contain the massive amounts of Force energy he was absorbing from his experiments. His distinctive appearance during the later years of his reign wasn't the result of dark side corruption alone, but the physical cost of converting his body into a vessel capable of storing the spiritual essence of billions of living beings. The Death Star's true operational capacity becomes clear through Palpatine's projections for systematic galactic harvest. His calculations suggest that the destruction of carefully selected worlds could provide enough Force energy to sustain his enhanced form indefinitely, while gradually expanding his power to cosmic scales. Each planetary destruction would make the next one easier, creating a feedback loop that would eventually allow him to drain entire star systems without requiring the Death Star's physical presence. The Emperor's vision extended beyond personal immortality into realms that approached godhood. His research notes describe plans for using accumulated force energy to reshape reality itself, rewriting the fundamental laws that governed physical existence throughout the galaxy. With sufficient spiritual power at his disposal, Palpatine believed he could eliminate concepts like death, aging, and even individual consciousness, creating a universe where all living beings existed solely to serve his will. The timeline for implementing this vision was accelerated by the growing rebel threat to Imperial authority. Palpatine's communications with Death Star project leaders reveal his concern that political instability might interfere with his spiritual harvesting operations before he could accumulate sufficient force energy to complete his transformation. The urgency surrounding Death Star deployment wasn't motivated by military necessity, but by the Emperor's fear that he might lose access to the galaxy's force-sensitive populations before he could consume them. The construction of the second Death Star represented an escalation of Palpatine's harvesting ambitions that would have dwarfed the destruction caused by the first station. The new weapon incorporated design improvements based on lessons learned from the original Death Star's operations, with enhanced energy absorption systems and expanded consciousness integration facilities that would allow Palpatine to harvest force energy from multiple worlds simultaneously. Your investigation team's analysis reveals that Palpatine had identified specific target sequences for the second Death Star that would have systematically eliminated the galaxy's remaining force-sensitive populations within a matter of years. The planned destruction of worlds like Coruscant, Ossus, and other former Jedi strongholds would have provided him with enough spiritual energy to achieve the Force singularity that represented his ultimate goal. As the evidence mounts, the true scope of what Luke Skywalker prevented at the Battle of Endor becomes terrifyingly apparent. The young Jedi didn't just destroy a weapon or topple a tyrannical regime, he prevented the consumption of every living soul in the galaxy by a being whose hunger for power had transformed him into something beyond mortal evil. The Emperor's death severed the connection between the galaxy's force-sensitive populations and the technological parasite that had been systematically draining their spiritual essence for decades. The Death Star represented more than Imperial military technology. It was the physical manifestation of Palpatine's vision of a universe where all life existed solely to feed his insatiable appetite for power. The station's destruction released not just its stored energy, but the trapped consciousness of millions of beings back to the Force, restoring the spiritual balance that Palpatine's experiments had been gradually destroying throughout his reign. The construction of the second Death Star, above the forest moon of Endor, represented far more than Imperial determination to replace a destroyed weapon. Your investigation team's analysis of recovered construction records and design specifications reveals that the Emperor's second attempt incorporated fundamental improvements that would have transformed the station from a force energy harvesting device into something approaching a galactic spiritual consumption engine capable of draining the life essence from entire star systems simultaneously. Dr. Vasquez's examination of the second Death Star's technical blueprints shows design modifications that exceed the original station's capabilities by several orders of magnitude. The crystalline matrix chambers that formed the heart of the energy absorption system were expanded to occupy nearly 30% of the station's total internal volume, compared to less than 5% in the original Death Star. These massive crystal arrays weren't just larger, they incorporated technological advances derived from years of testing the first station's harvesting capabilities against real targets. The synthetic kyber crystals used in the second Death Star's construction represented a quantum leap in Imperial force manipulation technology. Research notes recovered from the indoor construction facility described crystals capable of what Imperial scientists termed sympathetic resonance cascades, energy patterns that could spread across hyperspace to affect force-sensitive populations on worlds far removed from the station's immediate location. The second Death Star wouldn't need to physically travel to target worlds to harvest their spiritual energy. Technician Thorne's analysis of the construction timeline reveals that Imperial engineers prioritized the energy absorption systems over conventional weapon components throughout the second Death Star's development. While the super laser assembly remained incomplete at the time of the Battle of Endor, the crystalline matrix chambers and consciousness integration facilities were fully operational and had been conducting systematic testing for months before the rebel assault. The Emperor had learned from his first attempt that the weapon's true value lay in its spiritual harvesting capabilities rather than its destructive power. The targeting data recovered from the second Death Star's command systems tells a chilling story of systematic spiritual genocide planned on a galactic scale. Unlike the first Death Star's relatively modest target list, the second station's operational parameters included detailed plans for harvesting Force energy from every inhabited world in the known galaxy within a single standard year. The improved energy absorption systems would allow the station to drain multiple star systems simultaneously while using hyperspace resonance to affect worlds across vast distances. Commander Meridian's intelligence analysis reveals that the Emperor had been secretly relocating Force-sensitive populations throughout the galaxy in preparation for the second Death Star's operations. Imperial relocation programs, disguised as routine population management initiatives, systematically concentrated Force users on specific worlds that had been selected for early harvesting operations. These target worlds weren't chosen for their strategic value or rebellious tendencies, but for their capacity to provide maximum spiritual energy yield when destroyed. The forest moon of Endor wasn't selected randomly as the construction site for the second Death Star. Imperial geological surveys identified the moon as a natural force nexus, where spiritual energy from across the galaxy naturally converged due to unique astronomical alignments and the presence of ancient force-using cultures. The Ewoks, primitive though they appeared, possessed an intuitive connection to the Force that made their homeworld an ideal location for testing the station's enhanced absorption capabilities. The shield generator facility on Endor's surface served multiple purposes beyond protecting the Death Star during construction. Dr. Vasquez's analysis of the facility's equipment reveals that it incorporated Force energy focusing arrays designed to channel spiritual essence from the moon's ecosystem directly into the Death Star's crystalline matrix chambers. The Empire was using Endor itself as a testing ground for large-scale environmental force harvesting, slowly draining the spiritual vitality from the moon's forests and native populations. The Ewoks' primitive technology masked their significance as force-sensitive beings whose tribal culture had maintained natural connections to spiritual energy for millennia. Imperial ethnographic studies, conducted under the guise of routine planetary surveys, identified the Ewok population as an ideal test subject for environmental force extraction techniques. The tribe's simple lifestyle and strong community bonds created what Imperial scientists termed collective force resonance that could be harvested more efficiently than energy from individual force users. The Emperor's presence aboard the second Death Star during the Battle of Endor wasn't motivated by tactical considerations or personal interest in the rebel assault. Palpatine had traveled to the station specifically to oversee the first full-scale test of its enhanced force harvesting capabilities, using the battle itself as an opportunity to feed on the spiritual energy released by dying rebels and Imperials alike. The conflict provided him with a concentrated source of force energy from force-sensitive combatants on both sides. The throne room aboard the second Death Star served as more than a command center for Imperial operations. The chamber's design incorporated synthetic kyber crystal arrays hidden within its walls and floor, creating a massive force energy focusing matrix that would channel harvested spiritual essence directly into Palpatine during large-scale destruction operations. The Emperor intended to personally consume the force energy from entire star systems while seated on his throne, literally feeding on the deaths of billions of beings. Luke Skywalker's presence aboard the station represented an opportunity that Palpatine had been planning since discovering the young Jedi's existence. Imperial analysis of Luke's Force potential identified him as possessing what they termed exponential spiritual resonance, Force sensitivity that could amplify the energy harvest from other sources by tremendous factors. Palpatine intended to convert Luke into what his research notes describe as a living amplification matrix that would enhance the Death Star's absorption capabilities beyond theoretical limits. The Emperor's plan for Luke extended beyond simple corruption to the dark side. Medical equipment hidden within the throne room was designed to perform consciousness integration procedures that would merge Luke's Force sensitivity with the Death Star's crystalline matrix systems while keeping his body alive as a focusing conduit. Luke would become a permanent component of the station's energy harvesting network, his consciousness trapped within synthetic kyber crystals, while his Force abilities were used to drain spiritual energy from across the galaxy. Darth Vader's role in these plans becomes clear through recovered Imperial medical records that document extensive modifications to his life support systems. The cybernetic components that sustained Vader's damaged body weren't just keeping him alive, they were gradually converting him into a Force energy storage device capable of channeling harvested spiritual essence to the Emperor. Vader's breathing apparatus included synthetic kyber crystal filters that processed and concentrated Force energy from his surroundings, making him a walking battery for Palpatine's experiments. The lightsaber duel between Luke and Vader aboard the second Death Star takes on new significance when viewed through this lens. The conflict wasn't just about family relationships or moral redemption, it was a spiritual harvesting operation designed to feed Force energy from both combatants into the Death Star's absorption systems. The throne room's hidden crystalline arrays were recording and storing the emotional trauma and Force energy released during the battle, providing Palpatine with precisely the type of concentrated spiritual essence that his experiments required. The Emperor's plan reached its climax when he began torturing Luke with Force lightning while Vader watched helplessly. This wasn't simple sadism or an attempt to convert Luke to the dark side. It was the initial phase of the consciousness integration procedure that would trap Luke's spirit within the Death Star's crystalline matrix. The Force lightning served as both torture and technological interface, beginning the process of separating Luke's consciousness from his physical body for transfer into synthetic kyber crystal storage. Vader's redemption and destruction of his master prevented not just Luke's death, but his transformation into a component of the galaxy's most horrifying weapon. The damage Vader inflicted on Palpatine's life support systems severed the Emperor's connection to the Death Star's Force absorption network, causing a catastrophic feedback loop that released all stored spiritual energy back into the Force. The explosion that destroyed the second Death Star was powered not just by its reactor core, but by the sudden liberation of Force energy that had been trapped within its crystalline matrix chambers. The investigation reveals that similar feedback loops occurred throughout the galaxy as news of the Emperor's death spread among Imperial Force harvesting facilities. Installations that had been slowly draining spiritual energy from captive populations experienced sudden system failures that released their stored Force energy, often resulting in spontaneous healing and spiritual renewal among their victims. The Emperor's death didn't just end political tyranny, it restored the natural flow of Force energy that his experiments had been systematically disrupting. The scope of what was prevented at the Battle of Endor becomes clear through projections based on the second Death Star's operational capabilities. Had Palpatine succeeded in converting Luke and completing his transformation into a Force energy amplification matrix, the combined harvesting capacity of the enhanced Death Star would have been sufficient to drain the spiritual essence from every inhabited world in the galaxy within months. The Emperor would have achieved his vision of Force singularity, becoming a cosmic parasite sustained by the life force of trillions of beings. Your investigation team's analysis reveals that the rebel victory at Endor prevented more than the fall of tyrannical government. It prevented the transformation of the galaxy into a spiritual wasteland, where the Force itself would have been consumed by a single being's hunger for absolute power. Luke Skywalker's refusal to join the Emperor and Vader's ultimate redemption didn't just save the rebellion, they saved the very essence of life throughout the known galaxy from consumption by a technological horror that would have made physical death seem merciful by comparison. The investigation reaches its most comprehensive scope when your team uncovers evidence that the Death Star project was merely the centerpiece of a galaxy-spanning network designed to systematically harvest Force energy from every inhabited world in known space. Hidden Imperial archives reveal a coordinated infrastructure of spiritual extraction that operated in parallel with the Empire's conventional military and political apparatus, creating what amounts to a shadow government dedicated entirely to feeding the Emperor's insatiable hunger for Force power. Commander Meridian's analysis of Imperial logistics records reveals supply chains and personnel transfers that make no sense from a conventional military perspective, but create a clear pattern when viewed as support operations for Force energy harvesting facilities. Routine cargo shipments between seemingly unrelated Imperial installations were actually transporting synthetic kyber crystal arrays, consciousness integration equipment, and specialized medical devices designed for prolonged Force energy extraction from living subjects. The scope of this network becomes apparent through Imperial budget allocations hidden within routine military expenditures. Vasquez's financial analysis reveals that nearly 15% of the Empire's total military budget was diverted to projects classified only as special research initiatives, funding that supported hundreds of facilities throughout the galaxy engaged in various forms of Force energy extraction and storage. These installations operated under deep cover, disguised as medical research centers, prisoner rehabilitation facilities, and industrial development projects. Technician Thorne's technical expertise proves crucial in understanding the standardized equipment deployed across these facilities. Imperial requisition records show consistent patterns of synthetic kyber crystal orders, consciousness recording devices, and what Imperial classifications termed organic energy extraction apparatus. The technology deployed to these installations was specifically designed for compatibility with the Death Star's systems, allowing harvested Force energy to be transmitted across vast distances and stored in the battle station's massive crystalline matrix chambers. The network's organizational structure reveals Imperial understanding of Force energy flow patterns that exceeded even Jedi knowledge from the height of the Republic. Imperial Force researchers had mapped what they termed spiritual infrastructure throughout the galaxy, identifying natural pathways along which Force energy traveled between star systems and concentrating their harvesting operations at key nexus points where multiple energy streams converged. The Death Star wasn't just a single weapon, it was the central hub of a system designed to control the galaxy's entire spiritual ecosystem. The Empire's Inquisitor program served as both a recruiting mechanism and a mapping operation for this larger harvesting network. The Inquisitor's primary mission wasn't simply to eliminate surviving Jedi and Force-sensitive individuals, but to identify and catalog Force users throughout the galaxy for systematic harvesting operations. Each Inquisitor carried specialized equipment that recorded detailed biometric and spiritual profiles of every Force user they encountered, data that was transmitted to central Imperial databases for strategic planning purposes. The Grand Inquisitor's personal archives revealed the true scope of the Empire's Force User Identification Project. Detailed profiles of more than 50,000 Force-sensitive individuals across the galaxy, complete with assessments of their spiritual energy potential and recommendations for harvest prioritization. The Empire had created a comprehensive database of the galaxy's Force-sensitive population, treating these individuals as resources to be systematically extracted rather than citizens to be governed. The Inquisitor's distinctive rotating lightsabers contained more than intimidating design elements. Vasquez's analysis of recovered Inquisitor equipment reveals that their weapons incorporated synthetic kyber crystal arrays specifically calibrated to record Force energy signatures from their targets. Every lightsaber duel, every force-sensitive individual the Inquisitors encountered, generated data that was automatically transmitted to Imperial research facilities for analysis and strategic planning. Imperial Star Destroyers deployed throughout the galaxy incorporated modifications that served the Force harvesting network, rather than conventional military operations. Hidden within their reactor systems were synthetic kyber crystal arrays capable of detecting and storing Force energy from planetary populations during routine Imperial operations. These ships served as mobile collection points for spiritual energy harvesting, gathering Force essence from across their patrol sectors and transmitting it to larger storage facilities. The Empire's systematic approach to Force energy harvesting extended to civilian populations through medical programs that appeared benevolent but served darker purposes. Imperial health initiatives targeting Force-sensitive bloodlines included routine medical examinations that were actually spiritual energy extraction procedures, slowly draining Force potential from families and communities over extended periods. These programs operated throughout the galaxy, gradually weakening Force-sensitive populations while providing the Empire with steady streams of harvestable energy. Educational initiatives designed to identify and relocate Force-sensitive children served multiple purposes within the harvesting network. While public Imperial policy claimed these programs were designed to provide specialized education for gifted youngsters, the actual facilities were energy extraction centers, where Force-sensitive children were subjected to procedures that would drain their spiritual potential while leaving them physically functional. The Empire was systematically eliminating Force sensitivity from future generations while harvesting their spiritual energy for immediate use. The network's communication systems reveal coordination between facilities that spans decades of Imperial rule. Regular status reports document successful energy extraction operations, equipment requirements, and strategic recommendations for expanding harvesting operations into previously unmonitored sectors. The Empire maintained real-time awareness of Force energy levels throughout the galaxy, adjusting their harvesting operations to maximize spiritual energy yield while minimizing detection by remaining Jedi or Force-sensitive communities. Industrial facilities throughout the Outer Rim served dual purposes as both legitimate manufacturing centers and Force energy processing stations. Imperial factories producing conventional military equipment incorporated hidden synthetic kyber crystal arrays that could process and refine raw Force energy harvested from other installations. These facilities served as intermediate storage and processing centers, converting harvested spiritual energy into forms that could be efficiently transmitted to the Death Star or other major Imperial weapons projects. The Empire's archaeological programs targeting ancient Force-using sites represented another component of the harvesting network. Imperial expeditions to former Jedi temples, Sith strongholds, and other Force-sensitive locations weren't just gathering historical artifacts. They were installing energy extraction equipment designed to harvest residual Force energy from these spiritually significant sites. The Empire was systematically draining the galaxy's spiritual heritage, converting ancient Force traditions into power sources for their technological weapons. Prisoner facilities throughout the Empire incorporated equipment designed for prolonged Force energy extraction from captive populations. Political prisoners, rebel sympathizers, and other Imperial detainees were subjected to procedures that slowly drained their spiritual vitality while keeping them physically alive and functional. These facilities served as renewable energy sources for the Empire's Force harvesting operations, generating steady streams of spiritual energy from populations that couldn't resist or escape their circumstances. The coordination required for this galaxy-spanning operation reveals Imperial organizational capabilities that exceeded their conventional military and political structures. Secret communication networks, specialized personnel training programs, and technological standardization across hundreds of facilities demonstrate that the Empire had essentially created a parallel government dedicated entirely to spiritual energy harvesting. This shadow administration operated with resources and authority that rivaled the Empire's conventional hierarchy. The network's targeting priorities reveal Imperial understanding of force energy generation that went beyond simple individual sensitivity. Facilities were positioned to harvest energy from communities with strong social bonds, religious populations with shared spiritual practices, and cultural groups that maintained traditions connecting them to the Force. The Empire had discovered that collective spiritual experiences generated more harvestable energy than individual force sensitivity, leading them to target entire civilizations for systematic energy extraction. Regional coordination centers throughout the galaxy served as administrative hubs for the Force harvesting network, managing resource allocation, personnel assignments, and strategic planning for their assigned sectors. These facilities maintained direct communication with the Death Star project and the Emperor's personal research installations, ensuring that harvested Force energy could be efficiently channeled toward Palpatine's ultimate goals of achieving Force singularity and cosmic dominance. The investigation reveals that this network remained largely intact even after the destruction of the first Death Star, continuing operations throughout the period leading up to the Battle of Endor. The Emperor's confidence in building a second Death Star wasn't based solely on Imperial industrial capacity, but on his knowledge that the harvesting network had accumulated enough Force energy to power weapons far beyond conventional understanding. The galaxy was much closer to spiritual catastrophe than anyone realized during the final years of Imperial rule. Your team's analysis shows that the Rebel victory at Endor didn't just destroy the second Death Star, it triggered cascade failures throughout the Force harvesting network that released accumulated spiritual energy back to its original sources. Installations across the galaxy experienced spontaneous equipment failures that freed trapped Force energy, often resulting in unexpected healing and spiritual renewal among populations that had been systematically drained for years without realizing the true nature of their suffering. As your investigation team processes the complete scope of evidence gathered from across the galaxy, the true magnitude of what transpired during the Battle of Endor becomes overwhelmingly clear. Luke Skywalker's confrontation with Emperor Palpatine wasn't simply a personal struggle between father and son, or even a decisive military engagement that toppled a tyrannical regime. It was a cosmic intervention that prevented the consumption of every living soul in the galaxy by a technological horror that would have transformed existence itself into a feeding mechanism for a single consciousness driven by unlimited hunger for power. The aftermath of the Emperor's death reveals the immediate consequences of severing the connection between the galaxy's Force-sensitive populations and the harvesting network that had been systematically draining their spiritual essence for decades. Dr. Vasquez's analysis of post-Endor energy readings shows massive Force energy discharges occurring simultaneously across hundreds of worlds as Imperial harvesting facilities experienced catastrophic system failures. The accumulated spiritual energy that had been trapped within synthetic kyber crystal arrays was suddenly released back to its original sources, creating phenomena that Imperial survivors initially dismissed as equipment malfunctions. Technician Thorne's examination of recovered Imperial facility reports documents spontaneous healing events that occurred throughout the galaxy in the immediate aftermath of the Emperor's death. Populations that had been subjected to prolonged Force energy extraction suddenly experienced renewed vitality, enhanced mental clarity, and restoration of spiritual connections they hadn't realized they had lost. Children who had shown no Force sensitivity, despite coming from Force-strong bloodlines, suddenly began demonstrating abilities that Imperial testing had suggested were permanently suppressed. The liberation of Force energy from the Death Star's crystalline matrix chambers created what Imperial scientists posthumously termed a spiritual resonance cascade that propagated across hyperspace faster than conventional communication systems could track. Commander Meridian's analysis of Imperial communication logs shows confusion and panic among facility commanders throughout the galaxy as their energy extraction equipment began experiencing simultaneous failures that they couldn't explain or prevent. The scope of spiritual restoration becomes apparent through New Republic medical surveys conducted in the years following the Battle of Endor. Populations that had been gradually declining in health and vitality during the Imperial era suddenly showed dramatic improvements in both physical and mental well-being. Entire communities that had suffered from what Imperial medical classifications termed endemic fatigue syndrome and collective depression disorder experienced rapid recovery that Republic medical personnel initially attributed to improved nutrition and political freedom. The investigation reveals that these improvements weren't simply psychological responses to liberation from tyranny, but actual restoration of spiritual energy that had been systematically extracted from these populations over years or decades of Imperial rule. The Force energy harvesting network had been operating with such subtlety that most victims never realized they were being drained, experiencing only gradual declines in vitality that they attributed to natural aging or environmental factors. The Emperor's personal death aboard the second Death Star created particularly dramatic consequences for the station's immediate environment. The massive amounts of Force energy that Palpatine had accumulated within his own body was suddenly released without the technological controls that had previously contained and directed them. The resulting explosion didn't just destroy the Death Star's physical structure, it created what can only be described as a localized force storm that restored spiritual balance to the entire Endor system. The forest moon of Endor experienced immediate ecological renewal that exceeded anything that could be explained by conventional environmental factors. The Ewok population, which had been gradually declining due to Imperial Force energy extraction from their natural environment, suddenly displayed enhanced vitality and expanded Force sensitivity that allowed them to communicate more effectively with off-world visitors. The forests themselves began showing accelerated growth and increased biodiversity as natural Force energy flows were restored to their original patterns. The destruction of the second Death Star also liberated the consciousness fragments that had been trapped within its crystalline matrix chambers since the first Death Star's operations began. Imperial research notes describe successful experiments in consciousness archaeology that had extracted and stored memory patterns from billions of beings killed during the Empire's Force harvesting operations. These trapped consciousness fragments were suddenly released back to the Force, creating what Force-sensitive individuals throughout the galaxy experienced as a massive spiritual homecoming. Luke Skywalker's role in preventing the galaxy's spiritual extinction extends beyond his direct actions during the confrontation with the Emperor. His refusal to join Palpatine and become a component of the Death Star's energy harvesting system prevented the completion of what Imperial research termed the living amplification matrix that would have exponentially increased the station's Force absorption capabilities. Had Luke succumbed to the Emperor's offers, the enhanced Death Star would have been capable of draining entire star systems without requiring physical proximity to its targets. Darth Vader's redemption and destruction of his master represented more than personal salvation or family reconciliation. Vader's cybernetic life support systems had been gradually converting him into a Force energy storage and transmission device over the decades since his transformation on Mustafar. His sacrifice to save Luke severed one of the most powerful conduits in the Emperor's Force harvesting network, causing cascade failures that propagated throughout the entire system and prevented the completion of Palpatine's transformation into a cosmic Force parasite. The investigation reveals that the Emperor's death triggered automatic destruction protocols throughout the Imperial Force harvesting network designed to prevent the technology from falling into rebel hands. However, these protocols also resulted in the liberation of enormous amounts of stored Force energy that had been accumulated over years of systematic extraction. The galaxy experienced what can only be described as a spiritual renaissance as populations that had been slowly drained of their Force connection suddenly found themselves restored to natural energy levels. The long-term consequences of the network's destruction become apparent through analysis of galactic population trends. In the years following the Battle of Endor, birth rates increased dramatically throughout former Imperial territories, but more significantly, the percentage of Force-sensitive individuals born to previously non-Force-sensitive families rose to levels not seen since before the rise of the Empire. The systematic suppression of Force sensitivity through energy extraction had been reversed, allowing natural Force abilities to reassert themselves in bloodlines that had been artificially depleted. The restoration of natural Force energy flows also had profound effects on the galaxy's ecosystem balance. Worlds that had experienced environmental degradation during the Imperial era began showing signs of accelerated recovery that exceeded any possible benefits from improved environmental policies alone. The Force energy that connected all living things had been partially restored to its natural state, allowing ecosystems to heal from damage that conventional science suggested should have taken centuries to repair. Your investigation team's analysis of post-Endor Force phenomena reveals that the Emperor's death didn't just end his personal threat to galactic spiritual freedom. It restored the natural balance that had been gradually deteriorating since the fall of the Republic. The systematic extraction of Force energy from populations throughout the galaxy had been slowly weakening the spiritual connections that bound all living things together, creating a gradual decline in the galaxy's overall vitality that would have eventually led to widespread ecosystem collapse. The evidence suggests that Palpatine's ultimate goal of achieving Force singularity would have been even more catastrophic than originally understood. By consuming all Force energy in the galaxy, he wouldn't just have gained unlimited personal power, he would have effectively ended the possibility of life itself continuing to exist. The Force energy that connects all living things provides the fundamental spiritual foundation that makes biological existence possible, and removing it entirely would have transformed the galaxy into a lifeless wasteland, incapable of supporting any form of consciousness. The heroic actions of Luke Skywalker, Darth Vader, and the Rebel Alliance at the Battle of Endor prevented not just political tyranny or military defeat, but the literal end of life as a meaningful concept throughout the known galaxy. The investigation reveals that the galaxy stood far closer to complete spiritual extinction than anyone realized during the final years of Imperial rule, saved only by the courage of individuals who acted without fully understanding the cosmic significance of their choices. The destruction of the Death Star network and the liberation of its stored Force energy created opportunities for spiritual and cultural renewal that extended far beyond the immediate political benefits of the Empire's collapse. Communities throughout the galaxy began rediscovering Force traditions that had been suppressed or forgotten during the Imperial era, while new generations of Force-sensitive individuals emerged with abilities that hadn't been seen since the height of the Jedi Order. As your investigation draws toward its conclusion, the scope of what was prevented at Endor becomes a source of both profound relief and sobering reflection. The galaxy's brush with spiritual annihilation serves as a reminder that the greatest threats to freedom and life itself can emerge from sources that appear to offer security and order, while the preservation of what matters most sometimes depends on the courage of individuals willing to sacrifice everything for principles they may not fully understand but instinctively know to be essential.